Being a marketer's no sweat. You just have to manage dozens of channels, launch hundreds of campaigns, score thousands of leads, and okay, fine, it's a lot of sweat. Unless you have HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools to help you do all that and more. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Ducks Confidential Podcast. As always, I'm James Krepke, joined by Ryan Clark, and we'll be going over yet another Oregon win, this one over Maryland, a 39-18 edition from the, I don't know if you want to call it late Saturday afternoon into the early evening at Autzen Stadium, and we'll certainly go over that. And also, as promised, of course, with the start of the basketball season, we'll get into things in both men's and women's basketball, and a nice start for the Ducks on the hardwood as well for both programs this opening week of the season. So we'll start with football and what was a final score that nearly exactly mirrors the week before against Michigan. Yet the takeaways are quite different. I think the feeling is quite different, for certainly among the masses. And I say all that, and yet this is a team that scored 39 points. Quarterback threw for 3 touchdowns. The running game ran for more yards and more yards per carry than anyone in Maryland, not just this season, but in a little while. Tez Johnson's not there, obviously. Marcus Harper's not there. You played 2 right guards. Both of them played well. The defense has 3 takeaways, and the havoc rate was quite high. And yet, a 21-point win with 39 points scored and all those things, that seems to be somewhat looked past or glazed over, or I don't know, taken for granted, and I'm not going to look past the penalties. Look, the penalties happen. Though not all 12 of them were created equal, but okay, they happen. But for as sloppy as it was because of penalties, particularly 3 PIs and a defensive hold, 2 of which came in the end zone, 2 of which came on 3rd downs. I think 1 came on a 4th down. I'm not telling you they were good by any stretch of the imagination, but I think the declarations that this was some just abomination of a football game, no, I'm sorry. That's just not true. It simply wasn't.
No, I agree. And I think that this was a step down from the performances of recent weeks. But you look at the big picture, beside the penalties, which obviously Dan Lanning isn't happy about. And he even spoke about earlier in the week a lack of execution at practice, which he even was willing to admit in postgame seemed to carry over to the game. And he said it always carries over to the game if you have a bad quote unquote week of practice or day of practice, or your execution is maybe lacking. But yeah, I mean, overall, obviously, a 3-touchdown win over an inferior opponent who I think put up a good fight. And as you noted in your story, was a well-coached team that came in with a good game plan. It was still 39-18. And yes, the penalties are a concern. But you didn't see the kind of steep drop off in other categories for the Ducks that would make you concerned if you were a Duck fan going into these final 2 games in the Big Ten championship game thereafter. Obviously 2 winnable games left on the schedule for the Ducks, with Wisconsin this weekend and then coming back home against Washington, which we'll get into later. But overall, without Tez Johnson, the Oregon offense remained as dangerous as it's been in recent weeks. Maybe a step back by way of the passing game and an unexpectedly low passing yardage number, just given the opponent, given the fact that Maryland came in with the 126th rated passing defense out of 133 teams in FBS. The fact that you had a little more success on the ground than you expected against the number, I think, 7 or 8 rushing defense. It was a weird game for sure. A few unexpected twists and turns, but at the end of the day, Oregon was a much better team than Maryland. They pulled away for a 3-touchdown win in a game that I think they controlled throughout. It just was a matter of, slight regression towards the mean after, so many excellent and near flawless, honestly, performances from this Ducks team in recent weeks. They can't, as you pointed out, winning is hard, and sometimes you're not going to put in this virtuoso performance, even if you're the number one team in the country, even if you're playing the best out of the top teams in the country. I mean, there's upsets around college football over the weekend, and Oregon, I don't think, was ever really in danger of that against Maryland.
Remotely.
Yeah.
Not remote. The game was never in jeopardy. Not in one instance. Other than the fact that Maryland scored on its opening drive, it held to a field goal, no less, but never. Yeah, it was never in jeopardy, ever. It was never a truly a contended situation. And the game basically was over at halftime. And just calling it what it is. Again, this isn't making excuses for the offense. Obviously, look, it wasn't as good and prolific an offensive day for a variety of reasons, quite frankly. Yeah, there were 4 3-and-outs. Granted, the fourth one was at the extreme end where they're just winding out the clock. But, okay, statistically, it is what it is. And a turnover on downs thrown in there as well. All right, yeah. Yes, those things happen. But having said that, and some of it was induced by penalties. Some of it was drops, particularly early in the first half. I think Gabriel's first 5 incompletions were all drops. So, again, for everybody who wants to make it about the quarterback or play calling or what is the quarterback or the play caller supposed to do without that? That had nothing to do. I mean, the 2 of their first 3 drives that end in 3-and-outs, that had nothing to do with that. So, and then as to the run-pass split, by way of production and even number of plays at times, a couple of things. For one, it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt, but it doesn't help when the other team is playing a bit of a possession style, which is hardly a surprise. I mean, that had to become, somewhat expected for Maryland in the first half. That they basically had back-to-back possessions, of course, because of a defensive score. Now, I mean, you're thrilled because of the level of havoc rate that the defense caused, particularly Jordan Birch, who was effectively a one-man wrecking crew for the 45, nearly 46 minutes that he played.
And a hell of a running back, too.
He caused an absolutely incredible level of disruption. But when you do have back-to-back defensive possessions that span almost 8 minutes, to say nothing of 2 prior possessions before that the defense had already been on the field for over 6 minutes. Yeah, the offense at that point isn't just a matter of, they're now playing with the lead and all these things. Yeah, the other part of the objective at that point in terms of just basic strategy is to try to help your defense out by having a prolonged drive. Not just a number of plays, but in time. So I think that was an element of it, particularly in the second half. But regardless, it was abundantly clear, even early, because other than the 2-minute drive before halftime where they shifted to 11 personnel, I think almost the entirety of the drive, with the exception of that, this was going to be a, comparatively speaking, somewhat more conservative offensive game plan because they were covering up for the fact that Tez Johnson wasn't there and that the receiving core is thin. And by covering up for it, I mean that they were putting multiple tight ends on the field or multiple running backs on the field for the majority of the game. And 65 plays for the offense, they've had a couple of games lower than that this season, but that was on the lower side, generally speaking. And like I said, of the 65, I've got to go back and literally count them one by one, for exact, precise purposes, but it doesn't really matter. The majority were not played in their base 11 personnel. It wasn't. It was either in 12 or 21. And again, in a run game where you put up 180 yards on 31 carries, that against a team who just does not allow that. Well, there weren't a lot of vertical deep shots. No, there weren't, but there weren't a lot there to be had either.
Yeah, I think Maryland had a good game plan against it too. I think that they expected Oregon to try and air it out more than they did, but even then, like they were able to largely stymie the sort of quote unquote dink and dunk stuff for Oregon, and it wasn't just a product of not having Johnson. Like even if Tez was out there, I think that the Maryland game plan was such that they were largely ready for that sort of thing, but Oregon's offense still produced, and it got the shot in the arm that it needed in the third quarter too. And that was something that I think shifted the game towards where it ended up being. Was Dan Lanning saw the start of another unproductive third quarter, and he was like, I'm done with this. I'm done with the narrative. He wasn't thinking about the narrative in the moment, but he dispensed with the narrative by doing this and running that fake punt. Jordan Birch runs for 36 yards, shows off some serious wheels, a nice little cutback move in addition, but and then the offense gets set back up and goes down and scores. And so you shake the cobwebs off during this game, you get the monkey off your back with the third quarter thing, and then you carry that momentum to a 3-touchdown win, and the second half doesn't become as disappointing as maybe some previous second halves and bigger blowout wins were.
Entering the game, each defense had an objective. I mean, top of the board kind of stuff. For Oregon's purposes, it is do not allow Felton or Prather to beat you. And given the high rate of passing that you were going to see, particularly quick passes, but the high rate of passes in general, get home, cause havoc, get your hands up on the defensive line, create some takeaways, and don't let those guys beat you. Well, let's see. 9 pass breakups, a forced fumble that leads to a return for touchdown, 2 interceptions that set up for 10 points in the fourth quarter. Prather was a total non-factor, and Felton has 7 for 72, and nearly half of that came on one play, which was a nice play. But of all the objectives for the defense, they basically achieved them all. And you can't say, if not for the penalties happen. And some of that is occupational hazard when you're playing a team who's going to throw 45 times. Okay, there are going to be some PIs. That is going to happen. Yeah, and by the way, they were all right calls. You may not have liked the soft one, relatively speaking, soft one on Taishim in the end zone. That may not have been your favorite defensive pass interference, but it was defensive pass interference. I would have said it was closer to uncatchable. That would have been an argument. But did he grab him earlier in the route? Yeah, he did. He did.
I remember you noting that in the press box, and then looking back on it, I definitely do agree there. But yeah, like the defense had a phenomenal performance. Let's call it what it is. Despite the quality play of Maryland's quarterback, despite the weapons they were going against at the wide receiver spot, and obviously despite the penalties, they had a really good game. 18 points, and more than that, just how they were able to handle Maryland, bend not break, force the turnovers, get stops in the red zone, all of that stuff. It showcased why the defense is the strength of this Oregon team.
They played well as a whole. Yes, the penalties are there. Again, like I said, they're not all created equal. Well, first off, the roughing the punter, roughing the kicker penalty technically gets tacked onto the defense, even though it's special teams, but so be it. That's a tough spot. That you just almost have to roll with that, because it's one of those, what do you want the guy to do? But did Dalen Austin technically have the amount of time and room to be able to recognize he's basically got to do one of two things. Either he's got to completely pull up and pull to his right and avoid the punter entirely that way, or he has to so completely commit to only going for the ball at that point and then in the manner in which he would have to jump and attack it to not leave himself open to getting just blasted with the punter's leg himself. He either has to go so completely to the left to somehow, some way only get the football, which good luck with that, Or, basically, effectively, he has to basically hook right and avoid the punter entirely.
Yeah,
you have to just roll with the fact that, like, well, he's going to do as darned as he could, and if the penalty happens, it happens.
Yeah,
and
because the guy he muffed the ball. Like if you're a defensive player and you see that happen, you're selling out to try and get toward the ball, right? And so the circumstances led to him committing the penalty, and obviously they don't want that to happen. But I think you're okay with something like that when you know a guy's selling out to that situation.
It is what it is. There, it's extremely difficult, and especially no matter what you coach there, as soon as a gunner is seeing a ball on the ground, they're not thinking, oh, but if in the acts immediately following, if it looks like he's going to get there, I can't make. You got to be kidding. I mean, the reaction time and everything else involved is so minuscule. Just stop. I mean, that's just completely not reality. That ain't happening. But bottom line, all right, that one, so be it. The offsides on a subsequent punt as Dante tried to time it up, and then lo and behold, it actually totally turns out in Oregon's favor, because then Maryland goes for it and fails on the ensuing fourth down. Or the unsportsmanlike conduct from Nishad Strother, which, one, you're absolutely going to tolerate. I mean, you just are. No coach is going to say they're going to tolerate that, but they are.
Yeah, there were guys after the game, including Janoris Wilson, who were like, supportive of that because, you're protecting your quarterback.
The lineman will protect their quarterback. That, I mean, again, you live with that. I mean, that's, so be it. The other side being that, all right, and then you, on the ensuing following couple of plays, a punt that gets down inside the 10 and an offensive possession that ends in an interception. Now, again, you're not going to project that those things occur when you commit such a penalty, but point is, they're not all created equal. The PIs and the defensive holding, again, somewhat is be occupational hazard when you're playing a team who's going to throw that much. Some, hey, you just can't commit those penalties. I mean, just calling it what it is. You just can't. And some, again, you're going to live with. I thought the one on Jabbar, again, it was correct. I thought that was one that he probably, quote unquote, didn't have to, per se. But, man, ultimate look, you played the most productive receiver in the conference and one of the more productive ones in the country. You held him in check, and if you committed a couple penalties against him, so what? Again, like that, to me, like this, there comes a point where you do have to just accept that, maybe that was better off than allowing the alternative, which is in not maybe on those plays specifically, but maybe the alternative would have been either a touchdown or a long catch that could have been a touchdown. All right, sometimes it's just part of it. But as for the rest of the game, like I say, Gabriel with 3 touchdown passes. There were a couple of forced throws in there, particularly to Ferguson. There were none that really put the ball in jeopardy. Maybe one, and that's frankly being a little bit generous. There was one in particular where he threw to Ferguson on a low crosser, and there ended up being 3 defenders in his vicinity. He'd probably call it double coverage. Calling it triple would be a little bit over the top. And they noted during the telecast, he really didn't have any options upfield to throw to. Except for one thing. The reason why there were 3 defenders on Ferguson was that nobody went to cover Jordan James. I'm pretty sure it was Jordan. It was either Jordan or no. I'm almost positive it was Jordan. Out to the right on a delayed route where, had Dylan gone that direction, that is a walk-in touchdown in that case, because there was nobody. I mean, nobody. No one in the remote vicinity. Forget about covering. There was just no one there at all. All right. That was one. That was probably the most egregious because there were so many guys on Terrence and because the running back is just completely uncovered. All right. But otherwise, did he make a couple of nice throws? Yeah. Including one to James, one where he really put it on the line. It was a shorter throw by distance, but to the sideline and early on where Jordan came back over the middle and spun around and every which other thing inside the 5 there. That was a pretty nice throw, just in terms of for as low in line drive as it was. And you're without your top weapon by way of speed and explosiveness, and yet got it to Evan Stewart 6 times for 55 yards, late touchdown. And Stewart, on a couple of plays this season already, we've seen, has taken some shots over the middle that, mercy. Credit to Evan Stewart for being willing to run some of these routes, but my goodness, this is a tough way to make hay at times. Some of these routes that he's taken, because one of the early conversions that he had, my goodness. And how about the pass to Trayshawn Holden, where they had a defensive hold that gets tossed because who cares? But Holden makes a nice catch over the middle to set up a short yardage touchdown run. That, one, was an awfully nice throw, and two was a really nice catch that there may or may not have been OPI along with defensive hold, depending on how you wanted to call that one. There were a couple of nice throws in there on a night that he didn't have to throw a whole lot, on a night that some of his production could have been higher had it not been for drops. And he did it, like I say, on a night where a lot of the game there was only 2 receivers on the field.
Yeah, and DG was able to connect with Ferguson for a touchdown for the first time, and that was nice, just given their connection.
Getting away with one there, yeah.
Definitely getting away with one, and I loved Ferguson saying what anyone would say after the game that he was in, with pure confidence.
Yeah, they ruled. They said it was a touchdown, so therefore I was in. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. In the stats, it was in. So, but yeah, I mean you could look, if you didn't watch the game, you could look at the numbers and say, oh, well, no Tez Johnson, so the passing game was less productive, yada, yada. But I don't think that it was nearly that prescriptive. I think that in general, there's nothing necessarily to worry about there with Oregon. Now, if they struggle in a similar fashion, next week against Wisconsin, then maybe you can start talking about, like, when are they going to get Tez back? How big of a difference is that making? But at this point, they're so deep at the pass catching spots, and they've gotten so much from Kenyon Sadiq. They've gotten great games out of Evan Stewart the last several weeks, even with Tez Johnson on the field. I'm not worried about it at all, and I think Gabriel, his experience, his calm, his ability to get out of the pocket and make good decisions, it has allowed Oregon to thrive regardless of the personnel on the field. And they will love to have Tez back. I'm sure they would like to have him back by the Big Ten championship game. We'll see how that progresses in the coming weeks with his injury recovery. But I think they're absolutely going to be fine, at the very least, for these next 2 weeks.
Yeah, for these remaining couple of games in the regular season, it's not a matter of worry I don't think in any context, quite honestly. Again, they're just a vastly superior and more talented team. But in terms of just what the offense could look like, time has to tell. I'm not going to go off the one-game sample for myriad reasons. One, because it was only one game, and it was immediately following injuries. Two, because of the way that this did play out, like I said, in the first half, where time possession was a thing, I don't want to make and extrapolate too much off of that. And that Jordan James only had the one carry in the second half, and looking back at it, if he got hurt somewhere or had something minor somewhere, it certainly wasn't on the play in the second half. So I don't know if it was potentially there was one run where he got hauled down maybe a little bit awkwardly in the first, but again, he obviously went back out there in the second, and I really don't know. But bottom line, look, the offense, like I say, it looked a little bit stylistically different, and I'm not sure how much of that was absolutely by design because the receiving core was thinner. Particularly in the first half, I think it was that way. And how much of that was, oh, you're up by a whole bunch and let's get out of Dodge here and not need to necessarily, break the bank with anything by way of playing in your base 11 personnel a whole lot, and why put more on tape than necessary?
Yeah, and that's been a trend, quite honestly, and it's something that I think some Duck fans might be frustrated about is the sort of not necessarily bus parking in the second halves, but by a lot of measures just dialing back of the offense by Will Stein, partly situational. I mean, he scored 35 points in the first half at Michigan. I think you can afford to park the bus against them to a degree. Now, Michigan made its comeback attempt, but at the end of the day, you were in the position that you were in. So, hindsight is 20/20. But it is certainly something to notice about this Oregon team. Yeah, they brought out some unique plays and some unique stops, including the big man TD to Janoris Wilson, including the 2-point conversion. But at the end of the day, like it was the same sort of trend of a little bit more conservative, a little bit, the look that you don't want to put too much on tape sort of thing, which is interesting. It's not like, though, that they're going to be in a big game that's more competitive, especially at the half, and that they're going to be afraid to do that in the postseason. They're pulling all the stops out in the games that matter. Frankly, I know that an upset can happen in any game. Nothing is guaranteed in college football. Camp Randall's a tough place to play. Washington is a rival. But these last two games I don't really see being even terribly competitive for very much, if at all, of those games. And so you can save your stuff. You can be a little more conservative once you're in a position to win.
And they scored more than 30 points for 8 straight games. I believe they're the only team in the country left able to say that. That makes them a top 20 scoring offense. They have a Heisman contender, if not highly likely Heisman finalist at quarterback. They did it this past week, like I say, without 2 starters in the lineup, and not playing their starting running back basically the entirety of the second half. And they've been outrunning teams who are known for running and who have good run defenses in their own right. If all of that is just too much for you to bear, I don't know. I think some of you may need a little bit of a perspective change. If that's just intolerable, and you have a top 10 offense, including in the passing game, the number 8 pass efficiency team in the country, 15 in yards, a quarterback who, like I say, is going to be where he is from statistical accomplishments, from continuing to lead the country in accuracy, highly efficient, on the season as a whole, very rarely putting the ball in jeopardy, particularly after you get past the couple of weeks where the interceptions were there that were uncharacteristic, and they're proving to be even more uncharacteristic. I said that the complaints about the offense to me are bizarre in that I just don't know what people are expecting. If they want it to only look like what Kirk Cinetti is doing at Indiana, well, all right, what do you want me to tell you? I guess go ahead and hope that they beat Ohio State and that you get to watch it in the Big Ten championship game. I guess I don't know what I don't know what you're expecting in every. I mean, you can't be number one in every single category. And
that would be fun.
Awfully good.
That would be fun. Indiana and Oregon in that Big Ten championship. I would, as a neutral, personally enjoy that greatly. As at one of the worst teams in the conference's history against the new blood. I mean,
it would be a bizarre, just like everyone expected, sort of game by way of
because everyone's expecting the rematch with Ohio State, and obviously it comes down to that Ohio State Indiana game. Ohio State could easily win that, and then we're not even talking about this, but. Like that'd be fun. I would, especially going to Indianapolis for that game, with how Indiana fans have showed out this year at their own stadium. That could prove to be a fun atmosphere if that ends up being the matchup. But it really does seem like it's at that point now where, who's going to play Oregon is the question. And
which we'll find out probably in 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
Or just shy of 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And somehow, some way, Indiana pulls one of the greatest upsets in the history of its institution. Then, hey, like I say, then Oregon fans can not only book their tickets accordingly for Indianapolis, they could probably book them for Pasadena in the quarterfinals as well. But be that as it may, that's for down the road.
No chance for Sig's boys then against the Duckies, huh?
Well, again, I'm not going to weigh in further than a matchup that has yet to be scheduled. But be that as it may, a 39-18 win that again for some will just never make you happy because I don't know. Again, so be it. Again, I'm not telling you it was the cleanest. I'm not telling you it was the cleanest of games, but even in the areas where it was ugly, I just can't get particularly outraged. If you want to, again, for certain spots that you want to talk about getting cleaned up or something, hey, there were some of them. There were some of them for sure. There's some vulnerabilities for sure. It didn't necessarily come through a ton on the telecast, and it's hard at times in the telecast, but Poncho snaps as a whole over 65 plays were not very good. The fact that they didn't necessarily hit the carpet or go over Dylan aside, there was a lot covered up there by the quarterback in regard to snaps. A lot. And on the failed fourth down that they went for, there was a low snap that messed with the timing. So that did come through. That's had to have been cleaned up for virtually the entire season. Certainly the last 7 games. Some weeks more so than others. Just because the ball didn't go over Dylan or under him 4 and 5 times in a game doesn't mean that it wasn't an issue. It was. That's something that's got to get cleaned up. The long pass to Felton that was there, along with an earlier attempt, not to Felton, but to, I believe it may have been to Prather, or not, it's one or the other. But bottom line, there was a play action concept that Maryland threw, and they got Savage to bite down twice. And on the second one, that's what sprung Felton for the 34-yard gain on the final play of the third quarter. Something to clean up by way of, that's what the play is designed to do after all. But at the same time, but when you're not playing Maryland, when you are playing the winner of Ohio State, Indiana, and Indianapolis, their quarterback, who, and by the way, I'm not knocking Billy Edwards. I thought that is one tough dude because, man, did he get knocked around a lot again, and gets knocked around a lot in general.
And he made some tough throws, too.
Yeah, and gave his guys some chances on others that were incompletions that at least he gave his guy a chance. But if it's Ohio State again, Will Howard is not missing Jeremiah Smith or Emeka Egbuka or Carnell Tate on those opportunities, and those guys will be flying down the field accordingly. And in Indiana's purposes, they're not missing their guys, and their guys can also take the top off if given a clean field without a safety back deep in those instances. So there are things to clean up, both technique, penalties, whatever the case is. Yes. But in a game that was never truly in doubt, that you win by 3 touchdowns and again statistically achieve some of the things that were done here. I mean, pardon me if I don't look at this and say this was some awful display. It wasn't. Even if you want to talk about sloppy by way of 12 penalties, sure. But this wasn't sloppy by way of, they didn't put the ball on the ground or throw a bunch of interceptions. And the penalties were not, when I say undisciplined, I mean undisciplined by way of all these pre-snap things that were just completely egregious. There were a couple of pre-snap penalties on offense. Yes, there were. But, 3 of them were false starts. One was on receiver. But, all right, 2 false starts. I'm not excusing away everything, but truly, they're just not that big a deal. And you accept the unsportsmanlike conduct, you totally tolerate that to a point. There weren't a whole bunch of others. There weren't. So, they say some of it was just occupational hazard by the fact that you're going to play a offense that's going to throw that much. There's probably going to be a higher rate of defensive pass interference, certainly than compared to, Michigan by comparison, or Purdue. Yeah, you're going to commit more against Maryland than those teams. Yeah, you are. But even with that, some of them were just not that egregious by way of so intolerable, so insufferable. Some of them it happens. Heck, even the defensive face mask where, look, Mateo's got Edwards sacked and Derek Harmon's trying to make a play. All right, yeah, he ended up grabbing the face mask. So, yes, it's a blatant and obvious penalty, but at the same time, like, what do you want a guy to do kind of thing? He's trying to get after the quarterback and get him down, too. All right, well, yeah, they make sure his hand placement was a little bit better. Okay. But in some of these instances, you can't even make the penalties, in as many as there were, and there were. Even there, you can't necessarily make all of them out to be, again, the worst or most undisciplined of, not all the time. Hey, for a 21-point win, I think the negativity surrounding it is a little bit overblown, is all I'm saying. Hardly a sunshine pumper here, but this one just did not strike me as this awful kind of performance or game that some are making it out to be.
You've always struck me as an eternal optimist, James.
Well, I try to bring a little bit of positivity to everybody's day, and with that, we can shift to basketball, where there's been plenty of positive on both fronts, and given that the women played most recently on this past evening on Sunday night against Baylor, and picking up a win that in the caliber of win that hadn't been seen in these parts in some time. We can start there again. Obviously, significant by way of against a ranked opponent, first one of those in a while, and obviously a competitive game where they had a nice lead, gets back to a tie game, play down late to where obviously this almost the entirety of this team is almost new players. You can't say new players make plays, but bottom line, Alyssa Mevis makes the game-winning bucket there late. Your perspective, Ryan, on what has been obviously a very nice opening week, but particularly the win over Baylor, which is, I would not call it historic by way of, they've obviously beaten better and bigger teams, but historic in the sense of beating a ranked team when they had that had been a bit of a struggle the past couple of seasons, to say the least.
Yeah, no, it's night and day, obviously, compared to last season. And this Ducks team has said time and again that they're turning the page on it, and of course they are. They have 9 new players, and what happened last night was a product of that massive roster overturn. And I think a credit to Kelly Graves for doing the work in the transfer portal that he did. The top of that list, of course, being Deja Kelly, somebody who came in with a ton of experience from North Carolina, is a really multifaceted individual with her interest in broadcasting and her social media presence and everything else that goes along with her as a star in women's college basketball. But she's an incredible player. She's somebody that is going to lead this team this year, more than likely lead them in scoring, assists, be the engine that makes this team go, should she stay healthy. A point guard that's got the ability to pull up from mid-range with regularity, shoot the 3 ball, get to the bucket. She had 20 points last night, was able to play make the way that she is capable of, and really carry this team to an upset win. Their defense, though, as a team, and I think that the effort and the energy and the intensity that this group plays with, a lot of teams talk about that, especially in preseason. They're like, we play for each other, we play hard, this, that, and the other. And sometimes it's cliche, sometimes it doesn't necessarily ring true. But for these first 3 games, particularly against Baylor, who's a real quality opponent that deserves to still be ranked after this matchup and will still be ranked probably throughout the season, the intensity was there. The defensive energy and flying around and making the necessary switches and getting steals. Mevis is one that is particularly gifted in that department. Filipina Shea for all the work she still has to do in terms of, getting into game shape after her injury. She was the presence they needed her to be by way of shot blocking and her, long arms down low. But team defense, you look at it and the depth that this team displays, any 5 players that were on the court against Baylor were playing the type of hard-nosed defense that I think could become this team's identity. Kelly is going to lead the way on offense, but otherwise it's pretty spread out by way of contributors. You've got Amina Mohammed, putting the ball in the basket, getting steals, getting out on the fast break, using her athleticism. Mevis, obviously, defense to offense for her. Very skilled player, very fundamentally sound player who is going to make her layups, is going to hit the occasional 3-pointer. And they have shooting, man. We watched that Oregon team last year, and they just completely lacked any semblance of 3-point shooting. Alexis Whitfield, Kelly, all of these different players able to take and make 3-pointers with regularity. If you've got that sort of offensive versatility and ability to share the ball and all those other superlatives, in addition to the type of defense that you play, this Oregon team could make some serious noise. They could be one of the, I think, surprise teams in a Big Ten that is just stacked. You've got, like, right now, without Oregon being ranked at this point, you've got like 8 teams ranked in the Big Ten, and then the 9th is Iowa, who was the national runners-up last year. Like, this is a very, very good conference, and no doubt Oregon is going to face some serious tests and take some lumps, despite how well they've played in the early portion of the season. But this team could be a surprise, and there's some joy, there's some excitement, and there's some energy around this program, and it desperately needed it.
No, they very, very badly needed that kind of win, whether it was this exact opponent or what have you. But the fact that it was, and the fact that it was at home in front of one of the better non-conference crowds in a couple of seasons, those things all matter. Those are significant. You needed to show early, and I think Graves mentioned this after the game, where you talk about to a very new group with all the transfers that are there and the like, that you can talk about trying to instill confidence and preach about the fact that, you can be this kind of a team and what have you. But until you do it, it is just talk. And you've got to validate that with results. And when you get an early result like that, that's really significant. It is. Because conversely, look, when you are winning a game like that, and then you have a fourth quarter where the opponent basically erases the lead that you had established. If it had gone the other way, not to say you couldn't possibly recover in a very, very, very long season by any stretch of the imagination, but that's gutting, because here, you had this opportunity, you were so close. There's still that, all right, we can do this kind of feeling, but we had it, but.
Yeah, it's much better to get the win in addition to feeling confident, of course.
To get it across, quickly and get that jolt early is significant. Yes, it's against a ranked team, so therefore, again, to what that can end up leading to by way of statistical notes and things for record books, but it's so early in this basketball season that, let's not kid ourselves. I have no idea who's ranked now, who's going to be ranked 3-4 months from now on both men's or women's basketball. I mean, you have no idea. None. Zero. Baylor could be legitimately a top 15 team all season. They could drop out of the top 25. I have no idea.
Yeah, and that happens even with veteran teams like Baylor, who, I mean, they made the Sweet 16 last year. They returned 80% of their scoring. Like, one would expect them certainly to be a ranked team, to be in the mix, but stuff happens. Teams get injured. That's a thing you can't predict, but also teams underperform their talent and experience all the time. It is just what it is. But regardless, I think that, this win is one that is going to hold up for Oregon, even if they have some slippage, even if they have a stretch in the season where they don't play as well as they'd like to, even if they run into a buzzsaw in the Big Ten, which they very well might given the level of talent from USC on down in that conference. This is one to be able to hang their hat on as a potential, turnaround moment for the program after it could not have been at a lower low at the end of last year with 14 straight losses. The credit, I think, goes to Kelly Graves and the program for resetting in this way. And it's a long season, a long way to go. They could come way back down to earth and it could be disappointing. But the energy is such, and the emotion and the talent and the experience all sort of blends together in a way where I think that this is an Oregon team that could surprise some folks.
Yeah, they were kind of picked in the middle of the pack in this very crowded Big Ten. As you mentioned, a very competitive Big Ten, and time will tell as conference play eventually arrives. But in terms of early results, this was obviously a pretty nice one, to say the least, one that was needed for players, for coaches to like, and one that, look, we'll see. I mean, yeah, it's so super early, but could it end up getting Oregon by way of in the moved into the polls kind of result extremely early on? Yeah. And one that, whether it does or it doesn't, quite frankly, with the way that the rest of the non-conference schedule is such that, yeah, you probably string together a whole series of wins and you may move back into those ranks. And that's good on them. Good on them. On the men's side, albeit without the caliber of opponent just yet, that's still a little bit of time away. When they get to Vegas, they'll have some of those caliber of opponents in that event. But before they get to that, all right, yeah, the caliber of opponents were not there. I'm not going to make not going to make UC Riverside and Montana out to be Baylor on the women's side by any stretch of the imagination.
Much to Bill Orum's chagrin.
Not for nothing. Bill speaks about being such a proud alum. He did not. He did not attend Friday night's game. I say, some people are committed to this thing, and what can I say? He really, for somebody who speaks so much about Montana, didn't come to watch let's put it this way, a greatly rebuilding Montana program. Was either 8 or 9 transfers on that team, and they played very much like a team who was still sorting out how to play together. So, no, that was not the prettiest of games. And another 30-plus point win for the men on Friday night. But yeah, to start off with, forget about the points or any of the specific statistics, because grand scheme of things, again, because of the caliber of opponent, who cares? The bottom line here is this is a not just different team than, forget about last season, the past couple of seasons. From a health standpoint, we knew it was far better to open the season than it had been in a couple of years. It is. With that health, all right, but what was the minute distribution going to look like? You could talk about being deeper, you could talk about bringing in transfers, but if the minute distribution was already such to where it was a relatively short rotation or something, you could say, well, you had available bodies, but you didn't do anything with them. No. This is a deeper and much more balanced team than it has been in several years. Not just the last 3 or 4. No, probably before that. Because eventually the minute distribution will start to adjust. It will. And Dan talked about it after Friday's game. But right now, where you're basically playing everybody, I mean, the first game, almost everyone played 20 minutes, basically. You've gotten 2 games where virtually everyone who's played has scored, rebounded, and had an assist. Almost every single scholarship player has checked every single one of those boxes in these first 2 games. The rebounding one specifically. Whether or not they had a point or not, virtually everybody did. And assists, most everybody did. Hard to knock it. I mean, you're going to win a lot of basketball games when you're playing that many bodies and they're all producing something in every single game. That against certainly the caliber of opponents that they're playing in some of these non-conference games, they're really going to win some basketball games. Yeah, that's not to say that everything was perfect. It wasn't. There were some rotations where, the biggest part of these first 2 games is they're working on rotations. They're working on combinations and getting a sense and feel for it, even in games where they are the vastly better team. All right, but are you playing like it? Or are some of these rotations so clear that, all right, yeah, you're only going to turn to them in some of these kinds of games, because you may not be able to afford to do that in Big Ten play by the time you get there. Sure. But you're seeing Nate Biddle pretty much do what Nate Biddle does when fully healthy. Not only playing more minutes, but you can't act like this is some anomaly or something that you hadn't seen before from Biddle by way of capability, even his outside shooting. These are things he did before, particularly at times last season in very limited moments because of how little he got to play last season. But he's gotten off to a very nice start, specifically. But whether it's him, whether it's Kwame Evans Jr., also playing quite well in these first couple of games. Again, seeing it from TJ Bamba or Brandon Angel, it should not be a surprise to anybody who's watched men's college basketball, particularly if you were watching Oregon basketball the past couple of years, because Bamba played at Washington State most of his career with a one-year stint at Villanova last year, and Angel obviously at Stanford. So these are guys who you knew what you were getting, and vice versa. So seeing them produce is, again, it should hardly come off as a surprise. And the additions of some of these players, combined with, again, the depth and minute distribution and the like so far, is requiring and asking Jackson Selstad to do less offensively by way of scoring. Which, frankly, okay. They have more options. They don't have to just turn to, they've talked about already. Obviously, it's not a team that's got N'Faly Dante and Jermaine Couisnard. They're both gone, and they carried them certainly the entirety of the postseason last year. This is going to be a very different looking team. It is. And because of that, how the offense specifically is distributing production and what the guards are being asked to do in terms of assists, not just the guards, but what the guards are doing there. Yeah, they're being more facilitators. But this is a deeper team, more balanced team. The three-point shooting is better so far, albeit for 2-game sample. Though, even on the second game, even against Montana, where they shot better than they did in the opener, not as good as they should have been, or could have been. Some were rushed, some were just missed, and that's an area that could certainly improve a little bit. And defensively, there's always things to improve upon by way of not just overall performance, but communication and whatnot, and creating deflections and all the things that Dane always harps on and are part of the identity of his teams. But in November, again, you got to expect that. That's a given. Like, you're not going to have a finished product yet. So far in these first 2 games, all the things that were talked about and expected and, well, that just makes sense because, or you knew you were getting in this guy, all those things have been true. Everything has basically lived up to expectations by way of, in that regard. And if Supreme Cook is able to get back for Tuesday night's game against Portland, all the better, even if it's only for a couple of minutes. If he has to wait basically the entirety of another week and until next Sunday against Troy, whatever it is, the sooner that he gets into the rotation, the more they're able to have a truly comparable big, because he's probably played a little bit more power forward than true center before. But be that as it may, you're able to create even more depth in a rotation, particularly on the inside, and have another physical presence in there. At that point, you're talking about playing, 11 healthy scholarship guys. Yeah, that's a luxury that this team, I don't have to certainly remind too many fans here, like a luxury this team simply has not had in a long time. And to not just say you have them at your disposal, but to where you are playing them. That has been a long time since that's been a possibility. So again, you're going to have to wait until Thanksgiving week and the games in Las Vegas with A&M and San Diego State, and then the to-be-determined final opponent there. It's no longer Creighton as was originally scheduled, for those who've paid attention to that, but the Players Era Festival event. So until you get to those, all right, it's probably going to be a little hard to discern and take away too much over the next 3 games, with Portland on Tuesday, Troy Sunday, Oregon State the following Thursday. But point is, everything has been living up to expectations so far on the men's side. Not that the outcomes were ever remotely in doubt or in question entering the season by any stretch of the imagination. But you heard about deeper and more talented and more balanced. You didn't see 2 wins where certainly they would never grind it out or remotely in jeopardy, particularly in the second half. And you didn't see minute distribution or scoring distribution as such to where, they still had to lean on 2 or 3 guys only. No, these are, like I say, these are 2 games that were exactly as you would draw them up to be by way of the overarching things that you come away from the games about. Not necessarily any one small facet or one individual's play, good or bad. Just, if you're deeper, are you playing like it? If you're more balanced, are you playing like it? Yeah. We'll see what it looks like a few weeks from now when they do play better opponents, and if the minute distribution does start to get a little bit tighter. I don't think you're going to be... I certainly don't think you're going to be having 6 to 8 guys all season averaging 20-plus minutes a game. I do think eventually they're going to have to trim it down and lean on certain guys, particularly Bamba and Angel. Will probably get leaned on closer to 30 minutes as the season goes on. But in the games where you don't need it, sort out some of these rotations so that you can know exactly how to pair guys together later on. For now, it's looked awfully good. So, like I say, for what you could ask for in the opening week of the college basketball season for both Oregon men and women on the hardwood, they've delivered. They've totally delivered. Maybe even exceeded expectations, particularly on the women's side, given the win over Baylor. So a nice start to the year for both of those programs. And again, some solid games coming up for both of them as well. And I realize for the men's side that the game is in Corvallis on the 21st, but yes, that is now a non-conference game that's being played in November. So for those who want to make the trek up to Gill, that's only 10 days away. So set your calendars accordingly. This is no longer a January or February matchup. This is a November matchup. So yes, be prepared for that as well, as that will obviously draw, I think, just a little bit of interest, given that it's a non-conference basketball game. With that, a reminder that, of course, like, subscribe, 5-star review, all those fine things, so that way more people can find the podcast and chime in as well. And, of course, for those who already do, and for those who have yet to do so but would like to join the party, remind folks, Ryan, how they can submit questions to you for your mailbag edition, which, of course, now expands to encompass the basketball season that we just chatted about.
Exactly. I'm sure folks have a lot of questions about, what this Oregon women's basketball team in particular looks like with all the transfers, and then what's going on, obviously, on the men's side. But either way, if you got questions on basketball, on football as they come down the stretch here with 2 games to go, you can tweet at me at Ryan T. Clark or send me an email at rclark@oregonian.com. That's Clark with an E. And I will be answering questions every Tuesday per usual.
And with that, we will bid you adieu on another week of the podcast, and we will see you next week, and we will recap the game at Wisconsin and some more basketball games, and we'll set up for it's a it's a very late bye week, the second bye week. If Oregon gets through unscathed, having played 8 straight conference games, they're the only team in the league that will have to do it. And I believe one of the few, if not the only, in the country, particularly from the power conferences, who has to do it. So believe it or not, yes, the end of the 8-week gauntlet is less than a week upon us. And then a very, very late bye week for both Oregon and Washington, for that matter, on the bye week component of things. But we will get into that next week, and we'll go over more on basketball as well. So for that, we bid you adieu.